Hi, and welcome back to the data science course. This is part one, machine learning and data analytics. So in this lecture series, we'll cover the data science process. Now, this is a very critical activity which you need to understand before you start building the models. So in the lectures before this, we've covered some basic foundation courses which are required for building machine learning models. So you learn programming in Python, analytics through pandas, statistics and probability to cover all the basic maths required to build and understand the machine learning models. But now, what we need to do is how do we go about building a machine learning model? What are all the different process steps? So, if you had to execute a data science project end to end, how would you go about doing that? You need some kind of a formalized process. So, quite often, the focus of people building machine learning models is that, well, you know what, let's just load the data, clean it up, prepare it, build the machine learning models, and see the results. That's it. But unfortunately, that is not the case. Quite often, that's one of the reasons why a lot of the data science projects fail. There's too much focus on just the data preparation, analytics, and the model building exercise rather than actually going a step back and saying, well, what is the business problem we're trying to solve? That is actually one of the most critical and starting points for any data science project. If you don't know what you're trying to do, then you can build all kinds of models, generate all kinds of results with the data, and still lead to no meaningful conclusion because the results that were generated were of no use to the users. So, to prevent these kind of problems, it's very important to first define the business problem. You have to understand what are the objectives of the whole data science project. For that, you need to understand the business process. You need to understand the expectations of the users, understand what they want to achieve with the data, and more importantly, look at the data and see what you can actually achieve with that data. So quite often the users believe that they have data and they can generate some results from that, but unfortunately, the data might not be sufficient. It could be of a poor quality or it's outdated. There could be various reasons. So these are all the different things you have to perform before you start deciding whether you want to even execute the data science project. There's a likelihood that the data science project is unachievable with the data you have. So all of these decisions should be taken before starting, and that's where you do the step one. So let's just briefly look at the steps. And in the later lectures, we'll look at each one of these steps in detail. So we've tried to define this data science process, which could be used for executing most data science projects. Um, this is our process, so it's not necessarily the only one. You can solve your data science projects in various ways. There are uh, various other approaches available. But if you look at some of the guides, you will find that there are certain standard steps which you need to perform before and after building your models. And we believe that if you follow these process steps, there's a good likelihood that you will be able to solve the business problem that you're trying to solve using data science. So the first step is describing the business problem, which means you need to understand the business process, the objectives, the outcomes. Then in step two, you need to perform the EDA, which is exploratory data analysis. That involves looking at the data, the sources, the types, what are the problems with the data in terms of missing data and other things. Then in step three, you need to provide the possible solutions and scenarios. So you understood the problem, you've defined it, you've looked at the data, so you have a good feel for what it is. Now you can actually come up with some suggestions about what are the possible solutions, what are the different scenarios, what are some of the different algorithms we can consider using, and what are the metrics which you can use for measurement. Now that you've got some idea about the problem, the data, and possible solutions, you need to start doing the algorithmic process, which is selecting the algorithm and preparing the data. So in step four, you would go about selecting the algorithm which can be used for solving the data science problem, right? There can be more than one algorithm that you can use, and all that would be dependent on the sample size of your data, the type of problem you're trying to solve, and what is the prediction type. So effectively, the output that you want to generate, be it continuous, non-continuous, discrete. Once you've selected the algorithm or the group of algorithms that you want to build, you now need to start preparing the data which will be used by the algorithms. And one of the important steps there is the data wrangling activity. It's a group of data transformations that you perform on the data to clean it and prepare it for the models. It's a very good set of steps which prepares the data for you. And once it's ready, then you can use it for all the different algorithms. So this is a critical activity because generally you find that in a lot of the data science projects, you'll spend a good amount of time in data preparation. So it could be anything from 20 to 40% or even more if your data is of very poor quality. So once your data is ready in a standardized format, what you have to do is in step 6, now you split it into its dependent and independent variables. This is something which you need to do because you need to determine what are the outputs you generate effectively. That is the dependent variable which you want to predict, and then what are the variables you can use to predict that, which are the independent variables. And you need to split the data into training and test sets. Well, why we do that and how it's done in efficient ways, again, we'll cover it in detail in the next lectures. So you've split the data. Now you need to standardize it. Now, why are we standardizing the data after splitting it into the training and test sets? There's a very good reason for it. So if you remember, we discussed standardization. So most machine learning algorithms work well when the data is standardized. That is, it's a standard normal variable. So the reason for that is if you've got multiple variables which define the sample, they could have different scales. If one of those variables has a larger scale, the model might inaccurately give it a higher weight. So we want to compare all the variables equivalently, and that's why you need to standardize it. And what you do is you standardize the training set only because that determines its mean and standard deviation, which can then be used by the tester. We'll explain the rationale for that. Okay, so now you've got the algorithm to be built, you've got the data ready. So now we come to the most interesting part, which we all look forward to, is building the models. So how do you go about building that machine learning model? How do you evaluate it? Which is the best set of parameters? Which is the best set of features or the independent variables that should be used to build the model? So all of that requires another group of steps, and it can become quite convoluted. But the good thing is that there are libraries available which allow you to simplify and automate that entire group of steps. So we'll show you that also in the next lectures. Okay, so remember what we mentioned was that there were a group of activities which you need to perform before you start building the model, and there's a group of activities which you need to perform after building the model. So one of the other very useful process steps is data visualization. So you've generated these results, but if you just print out the numbers, it can be very complex. The users might not even want to look at it. So you have to make sure that it's easy to understand both visually and numerically and can be understood by users at different levels, both in terms of their process expertise and experience levels. So there again, we have a good collection of libraries available and they allow you to present the data in various useful formats. So you finally got a model that generates the results which the users approve of. So now you need to productionize the model, which is you deploy it to the live environment. So they must have certain applications which will use the output generated by the models. So you need to deploy it either to the local infrastructure or to some cloud platform. So this is another very useful activity. And you'll find that in a lot of the courses, this is kind of not really covered that well. So we'll show you different ways to deploy the models. Uh, And once you've deployed the model, eventually you will need to retrain the model because the data is in a live environment. So most real world applications, the data is changing on a constant basis. So you need to retrain the model based on the data. You might even have to update the model features because some new data becomes available. And then you need to redeploy the model. So all of these activities are necessary for the successful execution of a data science project. So I hope this basic introduction to the process gives you an idea what is involved. And in the next few lectures, we'll cover these steps in a bit more detail. Thank you.